Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Han. The Korea-Africa Summit and related events came to a close this evening. Reaching toward the path to shared growth and co-prosperity, the summit yielded a slew of economic pacts and cooperation agreements across a wide spectrum of fields. The summit came amid Africa's elevated significance on the global platform, marked by its abundant resources, rapid economic growth, and the world's youngest population. On today's Within the Frame, we delve into the major outcomes of the historic summit, key strategies to sustaining close bilateral partnerships, and the challenges that lie ahead. To help us navigate through the key discussion points, we have Moamen Gouda, economics professor at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Middle East and Africa Department. Thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We also have Dr. Siaw Agyepong, founder and executive chairman of the Jospong Group of Companies. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
All right, Professor Gouda, I want to start off with you. The summit brought together nearly 50 African nations, and the summit came as the world continues to battle rising economic and political uncertainties. Do you think the summit helped South Korea inch closer towards its goal of becoming a global pivotal state against such backdrop?
By all means. I mean, we know from economic research that usually economic powers are translated into political powers and vice versa. For, I would say, last 20, 25 years, Korea has been a powerhouse of economy and economic development. So it's a major economic power. So this will be definitely translated into being a political power. If you look at President Yoon's policy in his last 2 years, actually last year, if you look at his travels and his visits, nearly every month he have traveled abroad. Amounting to 20 foreign visits for the year 2023. So one can wonder, I mean, how all this motivation and enthusiasm is coming from. This is great, actually. If we look even at the amount of cooperation and so on, just last week we had President of UAE visiting Korea, biggest visit with UAE and in Korea. We have Korea investing in NEOM in Saudi Arabia. We have Korea going with the biggest and first Korea-African summit. So all these are indicators that Korea is playing a major role, and I think Korea will become a global, GPS, global, pivotal state in the very near future. I think this is what's coming to happen.
Well, the summit brought together 48 African nations, and that itself holds a huge significance,
by all means,
right?
By
and
all
we
means.
are, of course, very grateful for all the African nations' participation. And the summit not only focused on expanding economic benefits, but it also focused on how to jointly tackle urgent global issues like climate change, the impact of climate change, and also to how to resolve some of the grave humanitarian situations in parts of Africa as well. Now, Chairman Agyepong, the Korea-Africa Summit was held under the tagline, "The future we make together, shared growth, sustainability, and solidarity." Now, as a successful entrepreneur bridging Africa with many other continents, what's your overall assessment of the summit?
Okay, so my overall assessment is that South Korea targeting 48 African nations and 25 presidents. In business, our term is as an opportunity. Africa is a continent. So a state targeting a continent, you could look at the opportunities that is being advised by Korean government. You are looking at 1.4 billion people in Africa, natural resources, arable land, minerals, and so many virgin. Africa is a virgin opportunity for a country like South Korea. So targeting it up is a very strategic. The Chinese took over some years back. Now it's a turn for the Koreans. And I think that the president needs to be commended. President Yoon is a very strategic leader and need to be commended, and the people of Korea. They have supported Africa over years. And I think this is a right time. Africa is now looking at the global crisis, financial insecurity, food security, and other things. This is a time that Korea have to extend a hand to look at the possibility of bridging the gap and taking more advantage of bridging up. I've been informed of about 10 billion support and 14 billion export financing to Korean companies. So I think it's a very good opportunity, and looking at the assessment, it's the right time now that Korean government is taking opportunity, and it's good for business. The Korean businesses, yesterday we had a African Korean Businesses Summit, and including that, I myself met about 15 Korean companies we are looking at opportunities of making businesses in Africa. So I think in the total assessment, it's the right time, the appropriate time, and the Korean government need to be commended.
Well, Africa is gaining more and more significance on the global stage. We can't stress that enough, which is probably why many say that cooperation with Africa is no longer an option, but an imperative. Now, Professor Gouda, Africa is home to 30% of the world's critical minerals, and securing key mineral supply chains was one of President Yoon's main objectives. Do you think the summit yielded some tangible results on that front?
That's a great question. Let me tell you some numbers here. I'm an economist, so I like talking in numbers. First of all, the first thing that Associated Press this morning, when they covered the summit, the headline was, South Korean president vows to expand mineral ties with Africa and send more development aid. So, looking at all the business, as what Dr. Joseph have mentioned, and all the works, Associated Press have just tried to pick on the mineral ties. So this shows how significant the topic of minerals is. As you mentioned, 92% of platinum, 56% of cobalt, 54% of manganese, and 36% of chromium are located in Africa. And the interesting thing is that all of those minerals are used in the green energy, in electric vehicles and in chip manufacturing and all that. So actually the interesting thing is that Korea will have trade with African countries with regard to minerals, and then they will try to export this to Africa back again as with value added and so on. The interesting thing also talking about minerals is that when we are looking at the mines, critical mineral mines in Africa, U.S. has secured over 1,900 mines. Japan have secured over 134 mines in Africa. Korea so far have secured only 36 mines. And this is before the summit, you know. So after the summit, I think, of course, we need to see how many, mines will be allocated and how many cooperation will happen with this. But Korea is heading this direction. So this will be interesting to know.
So hopes are high that Korea will work together with Africa to build more resilient supply chains through various channels like the Minerals Security Partnership, better known as the MSP. And staying with you, Professor Gouda, President Yoon held bilateral summits with leaders from 25 African countries. How do you gauge the economic benefits those summits will bring, particularly in trade and investment?
That's a great question. Let's look at what Dr. Agyepong had told us earlier, the China trade with Africa. In the year 2000, the trade between between China and Africa was amounting to $11 billion. Last year, the trade between China and Africa was $257 billion. So this shows the increase in trade with Africa. And Korea, trade between Korea and Africa was $890 million in the year 1988. Last year, it was $20 billion. So there is room for improvement because up to now, Africa is representing only 2.5% of Korea's trade with the international world. So this was all before the summit. I think after the summit, this will all be changed. Regarding the question of the investment and trade, I think a very important thing to mention is that in the year 2050, almost 900 million Africans more will be living in cities. So we have urbanization, we have infrastructure, we have also nuclear energy that's being produced soon, maybe in Ghana as well. So all this will create a momentum for African countries and for Korea to invest.
Well, the Korea-Africa Summit yielded a slew of economic agreements. We saw dozens of MOUs and trade pacts like the Trade and Investment Promotion Framework, for instance. And as you pointed out, South Korea is a bit of a latecomer when engaging with Africa compared to its other regional competitors like China. But looks like the summit certainly did open up a new chapter for Korea as well as Africa for shared growth. Now, Dr. Agyepong, President Yoon marking the summit. Now, you've briefly touched upon this, but has vowed to expand Korea's official development assistance to Africa to the $10 billion level and provide up to $14 billion in export financing. What are your expectations for Korea-Africa economic cooperation with that level, this level of support?
Well, it's quite appropriate and very strategic. If you look at Korea and the continent of Africa, the trade in terms of percentage is about 1 to 2%. When you're looking at a continent like Africa, 1 to 2%. Other countries are in high percentages. Now, Africa has African Intercontinental Free Trade, which is AFTA, which have signed that all Africans trade together. So it's a very good and appropriate that such an amount goes into Africa in terms of supporting of aid and getting a lot of investment.
So it's an intra-Africa trade pact.
That is correct. Intra-Africa trade, taking opportunity of the whole African Intercontinental Free Trade strategy. And it's quite good. The second one is also the 14 billion to support the companies in Korea. To move into EXIM financing and other things. If you look at China, if you look at now the Europeans are doing the same. They are formerly China was doing it, and then Europeans are coming, Americans are coming. Everybody is trying to come and penetrate into Africa. So it's quite an appropriate that such kind of funding goes into support. Korea has a very good technology, good infrastructure, good kind of facilities to be used, but they were pushed back. They were not too much aggressive into Africa. So and I think that this 14 billion is going to push more Korean companies to go into Africa because Koreans, they look at risks, that Africa is a risk country. But I want to assure you that Africa is now open, very liberal, rich resources, security-wise and everything-wise is going on. Because of democracy, every African country now wants to develop. Nobody wants to get into wars and battles again. Africa is developing because we are all looking at the European and the Asian countries that they are leaving us behind. So no one don't want to struggle now. So I think that it's an appropriate time that this kind of investment goes into it. And Africa is welcoming. If you look at all the presidents who are surrounding here, it shows that they are all hunger for development. So then it's an opportunity that they take that kind of step to be able to look at how best we can share this kind of growth together.
Well, so hopefully Korea's expanded assistance will ensure Africa's sustainable development and also that the boosted trade and investment will create win-win results for both Korea and Africa.
And to add on, you know, in business, you need funding. You need funding stimulates business opportunities. So by earmarking 14 billion for export financing, it will motivate the Korean companies to go because they will not go with their own funding to risk, but a government funding will facilitate them. So it's a very good mode, and I think it's a very strategic thought of the president and the leadership of Korea to support that aid.
So you have very positive prospects for that $14 billion
Wonderful.
export financing.
Just even targeting some companies that are into that sector to be able to see how best we can access some of the funding.
Now, Dr. Agyepong, you mentioned briefly about this at the top, but tell us more about the Korea-Africa Business Summit that you were a part of today, the ambience, the topics discussed, and your thoughts on the summit outcome.
One of the sections that I attended today was speaking about health, which was very fantastic, very brilliant, and the direction that the Koreans have moved into surgical issues and other things. We also discussed about climate change, food security, and some kind of vital technology and the infrastructure, engineering works and other things that are all quite positive, that are demanding for Africa in terms of growth. Africa lack of all this, and we are trying to develop and grow into such things. So these are very topical issues. Agriculture was also discussed, which was quite interesting. Smart city was also discussed, and other technological advancement that Africa is lacking and that needs to be grown from. I see that Africa is the next world, which every country or every state must look at and foster some good corporations to develop. And Africa too has come to a level that is also developing. For instance, if you look at some of the business guys that have come here, I have just come here to look for opportunities engagements, enhancement, technology, partnership to grow my businesses. I just met a company who is into sewage treatment facility, and we are clicking a deal. By next month, he's visiting Ghana to look at how, but it's the first time, but by coming here, has facilitated him to come to Ghana, and we're going to develop and have a win-win discussion. So I think that is a very good summit that we all have come to experience, and want to congratulate President Yoon and the people of Korea for this engagement.
Well, hopefully the business summit will serve as a window of opportunity to boost exchanges between companies as well as entrepreneurs like yourself. Because we need boosted partnerships on both the government and the private level as well. The private sector also plays an important role in all of this. Now, Professor Gouda, South Korea is a bit of a latecomer, as I mentioned, when it comes to engaging with African markets. Africa is currently ranked near the bottom, as you pointed out, among Korea's trading partners. What are some challenges that Korea needs to overcome to better explore African markets?
Well, if we can categorize this to internal challenges and external challenges, I think the most significant internal challenge in Korea is that we need a stable policy towards Africa. In the last few years, we have seen liberal cabinets and liberal presidents are aiming for trade mainly, while conservatives are mainly aiming for talking about North Korea and talking about other topics and so on. President Yoon merges both categories at the same time, which is, I think, great. However, we need this, as what Dr. Agyepong have mentioned, also we need this to be stable, and we need this to be consistent across time. This is the internal factor. Regarding the external, also I will take from what Dr. Agyepong have mentioned earlier, that the mental image of Africa unfortunately, in Korea is that of conflict and war, which is now not the case. I mean, when we look at the last 10 years or 20 years, we have seen wars and conflict getting down in Africa and decreasing across time. So this needs to be changed. And Korea should aim for a stable government in Africa with stable partners, with long-term relationship, which have stability and economic cooperation. I think this is the main significant challenges that Koreans have to tackle in the next few years.
The summits also discussed joint response to global challenges like the impact of climate change. Now, Dr. Agyepong, as a trailblazer in Africa's waste and environment management, how do you assess the agreements made in those areas?
The whole world now is climate change. The whole world is focusing seriously on climate change. So I think that it's not out of place at all to discuss much about climate change. Today we're looking at flooding, we're looking at waste management, we're looking at so many things. In Ghana, the company Jospong Group have tackled waste management as a serious thing, from collection to transporting to recycling, and even signing agreements. In COP28 last year in Dubai, we signed with the Swiss government a 20 million package of climate change concessions. So I think that the whole world now focusing on climate change is very, very serious. And I think the agreement that has been signed give most of the Korean companies the technology. The Koreans have the solar, the wind power, and all renewable energy that foster climate change. And I think this is very, very important to export the technology that the Koreans have to move into that. And I think referring to what Professor Gouda said about the kind of capacity that Koreans have and relying on governmental support is very, very key. What I humbly want to place on record that in business, it's opportunity. Business is opportunity. Once you have the opportunity, utilize it very well. So Korean has technology. They need opportunity to unleash it. Africa is the destination for it. So you target it up and then develop it. What I just want to place on record is that Koreans, in talking about the stable economy of what they have, they must focus on private sector. I have looked at how African leaders develop. One, it is too governmental. You have the restriction of growth. If you focus on the private sector, Korean, we look at the history from 1960, the Hyundais, the Samsung, They are giants, private sector. So this 14 billion that is being focused on export financing, I applaud it. It should be based on private sector so that you can have your private partner in Africa developing. But when you rely more on governmental sector, the development becomes bureaucracy. It doesn't develop into the next level. So I pick waste management from collection. Today I'm into treatment. I'm into so many things that I'm talking about. So that is the private sector being the engine of growth in every country.
All right, because we're running short on time, I want to jump right to our final question. Professor Gouda, experts point out that Korea's ODA, development assistance, as well as its economic cooperation with African nations must be upgraded, which calls for a new approach. What strategies do we need to maintain close partnerships going forward?
Sure. Quickly, three things, very quickly. First thing, Korea needs to aim for FTA with African countries. We need this as a multilateral FTA, free trade agreement, very soon, because to materialize what happened with the summit. Second thing, we need to have more ongoing cooperation regarding tourism and regarding cooperation. Before I came here, I looked at Korean Air and started to see how many direct flights to Africa. Out of 50 African countries, we have no direct flights between Seoul and any African country. I think this needs to be changed by all means. Third thing, regarding the mental image, the academia. Here in Korea, we have only very few African departments, so we need also more increase, more scholars and more studies with African partners. I think there is so many things that have been achieved and more things to be seen in the coming few years, hopefully.
All right, we'll definitely be looking forward to some positive impacts and close collaboration between Korea and Africa. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you very much.
And that's all from our team today. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with more same time on Friday. Have a great holiday.